Hello, good evening everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Huddle 3. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by a panel that contributes to marketing immersive experiences from very, very different angles. First up, we've got Mary Mance, who's Director of Mance Communications, and she has extensive experience in devising effective lifestyle comms strategies to launch or promote some of our most prolific LBEs, such as the Crystal Maze, Peaky Blinders and Swingers, as well as a suite of hospitality and F&B brands. Her company work with experiences to build the brand's profile, engage customers and gain press buy-in through strategic campaigns and long-lasting media relationships. Next up, we've got Tom Bainan, a creative producer at the Path Entertainment Group, whose LBE titles include Monopoly Life-Sized, the Saw Escape Experience, and the upcoming Paddington Bear Experience. His role sees him work closely with internal and external marketing teams to develop strategy and adapt to the evolving needs of their audiences. His background as GM for touring musicals such as Footloose, The Crucible, and Spamalot with Celador Worldwide has given him first-hand insight into the differences in engaging more traditional theatre-goers and immersive audiences. Finally, we have Ralph Baker, who's recently joined the team at Phantom Peak as their head of marketing, before which he held a variety of roles across marketing and business development for companies such as Secret Cinema, Layered Reality, and Swamp Motel. He describes himself as a commercial creative that combines data-led sales techniques with imaginative creative strategy. Welcome everyone, thank you for joining me and apologies again, Tom.
Lovely intro.
Before we kick off, I just wanted to acknowledge that from the conversations the IEN has been having with a community of makers of all different scales throughout the UK, unanimously marketing their experiences has been cited as one of the biggest challenges in creating sustainable productions. There's such a varied range of work identifying as immersive, so a robust strategy is still proving to be an inexact science. It's our hope that events like this today will enable us all to learn from the nuances of everybody's approach. So if you have any learnings and insights from your own work that you feel may be valuable to this group, we'd welcome them when we open up the floor to questions at the end. So with that, the first question, the obvious question I'd like to put to you guys is, what is it about immersive work that makes it so challenging to market?
I'll go first.
Top two.
Yeah, if that's right. So I think the breadth of the word is obviously, that's a conversation that this industry is having a lot at the moment anyway, about how we define and sort of differentiate between different experiences. As a result of that, I think, and it's definitely something that we've learnt quite the hard way over our two immersive projects, is making it unbelievably clear about what it is that your experience is. I think it's definitely something that was a throwback to us working in theatre, and the idea that you want to keep everything sort of secret and not give away all the magic that happens on stage, etc. I think we definitely did that when we started Monopoly, and we definitely did that when we started Saw, and I think we are now absolutely in the opposite end of that spectrum, and just sort of saying, look, the only way for us to differentiate and let our audiences know what this is and how different Saw is to Monopoly is by showing you exactly what it is. So I think that's part of the challenge is, or one of the biggest challenges that we've faced is really just demonstrating and making it absolutely clear to somebody who's got 6 seconds worth of attention span on a digital media advert what it is that they're buying a ticket for.
And are you leading then with the level of participation, or mainly that's the kind of thing that distinguishes?
Yeah, definitely. And again, we've only just started doing that. Monopoly's been over for 2 years, but we've only just got into our mindset that what we need to demonstrate is people playing, not just what the set looks like and how lovely that is, etc. You need to just show people playing, because then you understand exactly what the level of engagement is and what you are being immersed into, I suppose. Rather than, so if it's something where you're being surrounded by hundreds of people and there's actors playing to you and you're walking through that space and interacting with them like a Peaky Blinders type thing, that's great. Let's show that. Whereas something like Monopoly is 1 actor, 6 players in a very specific, different gaming situation. So yeah, sorry.
And I would say just very quickly, when you're announcing, just sort of from the very, very early stages of announcing something to press that then goes forward to your consumer. If you're not clear of what you're delivering, press will fill in the gaps, and then you're letting somebody else essentially deliver your messaging, which is really not helpful. Which has happened occasionally with certain people who want to keep everything close to their chest.
Yeah, I think it's a very oversaturated market as well, which doesn't help necessarily for the when you're marketing kind of immersive experiences. I think there are a lot of people who initially kind of have that kind of comparison thing. So they think, well, this is like this, therefore I don't need to go to it or whatever. And it's kind of convincing them, again, that there is this kind of differentiation point and that there is a... it's interesting you talk about imagery and kind of showcasing what the products are as well, because certainly I find at Phantom Peak because we have a indoor and an outdoor space, and we found when it was raining, people, obviously showcasing pictures of it outside meant people thought, oh, that's an outside thing, and they wouldn't even look further necessarily. So it's about, especially with digital media and the digital kind of advertising and marketing side of things, making sure you're very reactive as well to what's happening at that particular time, whether it be bank holidays or whatever sort of thing. So, but it is challenging. It's
Yeah, so it feels like one of the things you're all kind of saying here is really managing that audience expectation on exactly what they're buying a ticket to. Do you feel that we have sufficient knowledge of this audience and the nuance in their behaviour compared to other forms of entertainment that they buy tickets to? Or if not, what is it that we're really missing in terms of insights?
I don't think so. I think that because the immersive audience is growing into a much more generalist audience, and we see people coming from the kind of West End theatre world now, that's opening it up, which obviously means it's great because you have a wider audience. It also means you have to be really clear with your targeting, kind of really understand the differentiations of kind of personas that you're looking at and to market to. So I think, we have a tendency, I think, especially kind of creators and especially people who kind of have this, the idea of what their company is, there is sometimes a tendency to say, this is my audience without necessarily looking at the research. And it's okay if that's not your audience, I think. I think if it's okay if you are more, this particular market rather than this one sort of thing, as long as you can understand it and kind of tailor that or tailor your experience to it.
Yeah. You mentioned certain personas. I've used audience agency and Arts Council insights in the past. Personally, I feel that there are probably still a few pieces or nuggets that are missing from that. Where do you usually go to for your persona insight? And is it based on information you've collated yourself within a production?
I feel like I'm just going to keep speaking.
No, it's all good. I mean, to be honest, we are actually really poor at that. And that kind of active choice, like in that sense, and I think it's something to hold our hands up to. I think one of the things that I found particularly interesting, having stepped from a traditional theatre background into and starting with Monopoly, is that I think we very arrogantly decided what our audience was. Essentially, what you were saying then. We essentially said, oh, we've designed a gaming experience. I like gaming. I'm probably the audience for this, and that was absolutely not the case. We got Monopoly fans, and it sounds obvious, but actually a huge number of the people who came to Monopoly had never done anything experiential in their lives. And so actually if we'd just presumed that, like we did, that we were selling it to me, then we actually missed out on a huge amount of that market. And that was something luckily we did pick up on that quite quickly, because the games were very difficult and too difficult. So then we sort of brought that back, and something that's, but I think I personally feel like the audience for immersive stuff is really wide, and I don't necessarily think that's the kind of thing that those current, and I'm sure there's a way to use them. I've just not come across it. Those current kind of Experian style, this is someone with a 2-bed house and 3 kids type thing is necessarily.
Yeah, I think. For me, there's a 3-pronged approach to starting off looking at it, and I agree that it's not perfect, and I think it's an iterative process as well of kind of like constantly analysing your audience and constantly seeing where they are and what they've maybe moved on to, or kind of new audiences coming in. But for me, it's looking at the data coming in from your Google Analytics and the kind of like the very top line data of what people's interests and age and location and demographics are. I think you combine that with something like the IEN audience report. Sounds like something that's a tool that is kind of, looking at that kind of research-led tool. And I think the last one is kind of customer profiling, as in, when a consumer leaves your event or enters your event, having that kind of consumer research piece, just literally asking your customers and one of the things that I do is kind of pick out people a little bit and create those personas out of them. So get someone who's the right kind of age range, the right kind of like, situation in life or whatever sort of thing, and just interview them to look at their kind of buying motivations, their concerns, their pain points. If they don't like, if they're one of their frustrations that turns them off from buying experiences that they, when a website isn't optimized for mobile, then that's something that you need to look at. And that's something that you are losing people at that point and they're falling off because of certain things. So it's about kind of, I guess, putting your hands back and going, I'm not actually sure of that. Let's constantly kind of revisit it as a model.
Yeah.
Can I just add that I would say just when new businesses, whether they have an IP or no IP, when they first come and talk to us, it's the first question we ask is, who is your audience and how big do you want that audience to be? As in, we're a lifestyle company, so we appeal. Our contacts and our coverage would appeal to the biggest common denominator. So ultimately, if it is a big project or it's an interesting enough project, it could be covered by everybody and appeal to everybody. But we need to put it out there as that. If you're very, very specific and you're just going for gamers, that's a very niche market. I mean, I know that gaming is huge, but not necessarily the gaming. Immersive doesn't necessarily appeal to the gaming audience. So for us, it's like lifestyle is the broadest audience. And so we would always say your appeal needs to be big if you're wanting to sell volume tickets. So, it's from that very, very early stage, who is it that you're wanting to appeal to?
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to audience expectations. You mentioned, it's really about being very clear and showing as well. So you're now kind of giving away a little bit more about what happens once you cross that threshold. There is a report that was done by Pseudonym Productions and Immersive Experience Institute in 2020 in the US. They added an addendum in 2022 where they proposed a rating system that should be front-facing on all new attractions. And the key elements they've added to that are genre, age guidance, and level of interaction and sub-interaction. How valuable do you think this would be for the sector to adopt universally in helping to manage audience expectations?
Yeah, I think it's, if there's anything that can help, that'd be amazing. I think it's a really interesting model that these guys put together, and the idea about trying to sort of formalize everything that there is. I think part of this whole conversation is the fact that because the word is so broad, actually drawing down the limitations of that. Essentially, where we are is at the beginning of an industry, really, in many respects. And I think that as a result of that, there's so much creativity flying around and people coming up with these ideas that how do you define that? I really like the idea of trying to come up with a system that makes it really simple from a quick glance what something is and etc. I just wonder whether or not we've got quite enough.
Yeah, for me, I always go back to Joe Pine's kind of methodology from the experience economy. So Joe Pine and Gilmore wrote a book in the late 90s called The Experience Economy. I'm sure we all know about it because we're here, but he kind of created this methodology which was about, it had 4 different kind of audience types essentially. You had bathers, waders, swimmers and divers. And the way it kind of looks into it is you have a bath, here it is, there you go, perfect. You have levels of participation. So if you think about kind of being in the water, so, the traditional model of being immersed and immersive is if you're in a bath, if you submerge yourself in a bath, you're fully immersed in that new medium, in that new kind of environment. So he takes that kind of methodology and looks at kind of the fully passive, partially passive, fully active, whatever, all the way up to kind of full-on divers. Now, divers are these fully active participants. They're fully in the water. They're fully going for the immersive world and everything. You've got swimmers who are kind of partially active, but they're still really game for it. Bathers and plungers, they're kind of fully passive. So they're interested in it basically goes from waders, swimmers, bathers and divers. So it goes an odd way. But I think looking at this and kind of analyzing, when you're looking at those consumer profiles and looking at those audiences, who fits what, is helpful as well to see what they're going to be like in terms of, when you were saying about Monopoly, in terms of people kind of haven't necessarily done those experiences before, that will inhibit them to necessarily throw themselves, or it will change the way they throw themselves in, I think, and it will change the way they interact with the content. So kind of having that understanding, I suppose, is quite helpful.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but I mean, it's, kind of some things that's helpful.
Yeah. I guess some sort of standardization is chipping away and at least creating a common language for audiences to start understanding as well. There has been a lot of value in using IP to create these immersive experiences, both to extend the life of brands, but also to give audiences a world that they recognize in order to start learning the rules of engagement, which was particularly valuable when immersive started cutting through to the mainstream. People now understand those rules of engagement, and there seems to be more of an appetite for original IP work, which of course comes with its own challenges. What are the challenges you've experienced with original IP when it comes to enticing audiences to try something new, and how can we best overcome that?
Shall I do, so when we announced Phantom P, which was is a completely unique and original IP, press, that I always come from the kind of media perspective, liked to pigeonhole it into something they recognised anyway. So it became a West world, or it became this is sort of referring back to where we were sort of a few questions ago. It's why you have to define really what it is you want people, the audience, to understand, to take from a piece of writing about it before they come, because that's what will drive them to come. But I do think that press will always, or media will always compare. So even if you've got a unique IP, they will always identify it at the moment with something that already exists or has been written in the past, or something that they can engage their audience with it, you know.
So still looking for some sort of root of familiarity.
They do, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that comparison thing, absolutely true. I think it also it makes people kind of look at cost as well. So it makes people go, oh, this looks really similar to this, therefore I don't know why I would be paying X amount of money for kind of original IP. I think it does offer the opportunity as a positive to have community building in a really interesting way. We have a really dedicated base of fans who are amazing, but who really kind of, they have all these theories about this world and everything, and they kind of engage, they created their own Discord page and everything. Amazing kind of community-based sort of thing. So I think that the challenges can sometimes become the solutions. It sounds really like, it's stupid to say it, but you know, if you kind of go hard enough into one direction and say, right, what is this? Like, tell us, almost, sort of thing. You know, like what, like you know, that's where it comes to the audience thing as well, I guess, where you kind of like, you know, what is this similar to? Great, okay, then, you know, Punch Drunk is Promenade Theatre, for example, sort of thing. Whereas, you know, Westworld is obviously a TV show. There's a video game element to Phantom Peak. It's kind of like targeting, and that actually can be really helpful to target certain audiences. So when we target a gamer audience, we will say it's like being in a video game. It's like walking through and you talk to characters, you're on missions. Every season we do is a new kind of like you're playing a game. So it can be helpful, but I think the limitations there are, the 100%, as soon as people go in, they will compare it to something else, and that is, it can be difficult,
Yeah. It's interesting you speak of building this community. I know from my own experience, and I think things that you guys have mentioned offline, that a lot of what drives sales is word of mouth. How better can we leverage these communities or these fans and advocates to really keep driving that or creating that halo effect for us?
I think so again, and I appreciate that this is probably slightly anecdotal as well, which I know we were trying to avoid. But I think from what I've experienced over the last few years, I basically think we need to be more innovative in general about how we're engaging with our audiences, because I think certainly the agencies I've worked with, and because it was our point of comfort, we came from that sort of more theatre-based, slightly more traditional way of marketing shows, and I think it's become very clear that just isn't necessarily correct. I think it's great that, you know, we're talking, like, our audiences are pretty much, and again, pigeonholing when I said they're impossible to pigeonhole, sort of 25 to 40-year-olds, and that sort of generation is our core. Yes, it expands either side of that, but that's our core. And the fact is, they are using Discord, and they are using Reddit, and they are using these kind of sort of community hub and YouTubes and that kind of thing, which we have probably just sort of left behind a bit or fallen behind on. And it's very prevalent on Saw. Saw has an amazing horror Reddit community around it, and it's so hard to get into that community. And so I think if like just looking at ways that we can engage that natural, organic self-marketing and the word of mouth, because Monopoly is now at that point where the word of mouth is sustaining it, but it's taken it 2 years to get there, and like that's just not plausible for most products.
I think there's a very unhealthy competitiveness in the immersive world a lot of the time, in terms of I'm quite privileged that I'm an immersive theatre nerd by nature, so I kind of, I am part of the audience. We're going against exactly what we just said, because I don't want to say, but I think having that interest in, I would go to Phantom Peak, but I would also go to Monopoly, I would also go to Sort, that, they're not as fickle as the immersive audience, so I think they do travel around, go to these different shows because they just love the word immersive and they love kind of immersive shows. Therefore, I think one of these word of mouth things is about sort of closing, shutting down those barriers, I think, that some immersive theatre shows put up potentially, kind of seeing, well, we're the best, or we're doing this, or we're completely different to you guys. Like, the audiences are mingled in there, and they'll be going to all these different shows, and sort of that, I think, slightly unhealthy competitiveness sometimes with kind of wanting to share audiences somehow, whether that be through doing kind of a discount code or joining up and partnering in some way, can be quite unhealthy, I think. And it's, I think also it's about looking at, obviously social media. There's, you can tap into OPNs, other people's networks. I don't like using acronyms, but I also have to. These are like Facebook groups that are, like immersive theatre lovers on Facebook. These are things where you can tap into existing communities and make them part of your community, which I think is really helpful. And that word of mouth, social word of mouth, I suppose, it taps into influencer marketing and stuff, I guess, as well. There's a lot of different ways to do it, I think.
I mean, I like with the IP stuff, so many of those communities exist, and when we've launched IP-led immersive experiences, we'll invite them down prior to, with the Crystal Maze and with Sherlock and with Jurassic, and they've got a massive following. You have to be a bit careful not to sort of but I do think it is important to bring them on board really early. Just give them some love.
And to kind of, I guess, keep showing that love if they're, because you ultimately want your consumers to become brand ambassadors. Yeah. That's the perfect way of like creating a, that's the goal really of a lot of these kind of fan bases. Is there's no point in being a fan and kind of talking about your show if you're not kind of directing it a little bit. So it's kind of, giving them a bit, inviting them to a preview maybe, or doing something where it's kind of, I mean, Disney 23, they fly them around the world. Yeah. I mean, like they've really got like a massive community.
No, but I mean, like, if you look, you can learn from how they do it a bit, because I mean, it's a massive scale, but they really still take care of it. Sandwiches.
Sandwiches. With that, for creators that do have small budgets or are one-man operators, one-woman operators, one-person operators, what is the first thing they should invest in, or really, in terms of priorities, what are the things they can activate themselves that have the biggest return?
I mean, I guess going back to what I was saying, I think I've seen a lot of benefit from cross-promotional marketing with other kind of with other agencies or companies in immersive theatre, where we do sort of, contra mailer. So we'll kind of reach out to their audience, they'll reach out to ours, and we see a massive kind of, that's a free thing you can do a lot of the time. Can be challenging if you're starting out, obviously. I think, social media is a great tool that you can utilise and kind of really kind of leverage to that extent as well. Ditto to kind of PPC marketing campaigns and kind of social ads and Google ads and stuff and everything, which you can kind of cap budgets at. So I suppose that can be quite helpful. And just finding those communities, I think.
Yeah. Could you share a little bit about sort of testing within social and PPC, and if you have a small budget, like how that could work for people?
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of A/B testing, so like testing two creatives in the same kind of campaign. I think that there is, using your own social channels to kind of, I suppose, test responses to certain types of creative before making them an ad maybe is a good suggestion, in terms of if you see a particular video. This all assumes that you also have video, you create the video in-house, because that's a whole other kind of conversation, I suppose. But if you have a great video, put it on the socials, see what reaction it gets and everything, as a, share it around in a mailer, for example. If it's getting a lot of reaction, a lot of shares or clicks or opens or whatever, making that maybe a kind of ad before spending the money, I suppose, is quite a good, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I do think collaborations are a really good, so even if you're looking at producing something in a venue that has a kind of a kitchen or something that a bar or something where you can bring in a collaborator who creates a really cool food and drink operation that works with what you're doing, that's really clever, you can capitalize on anyone else's profile and they will yours as well. It makes the story much more, like, it makes it bigger, and then in terms of getting press engaged, it's your hook as well as what you're delivering. Think about how you can work with other people to create something that captures multiple audiences, not sort of, just the one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are things.
I think if I was just going to quickly add, I think if there was one place that I would also suggest looking at doing a little bit of investment into, and it probably sounds really obvious, but a really good website and a really solid ticketing system, even if that's as simple as it can be, but it just has to work, because there's no point spending all this time getting people to your website if we just lose them from that point. And
by good ticketing system, you mean something off the shelf, not suggesting people build their own ticketing.
That's the thing. Like, building your own is fine. That's not that. It's more just it just has to work when it goes on sale.
Yeah, which is the challenge in the industry a lot of the time.
Yeah, and sounds obvious, but we get it wrong.
And what sort of percentage of budget do you put aside for marketing out of your overall CapEx and OpEx? And how is that split across your marketing mix? And finally, does that percentage change for a smaller independent operation versus a long-standing production?
Pre-production is probably about 25%. It's pretty significant. And then that probably drops to about between 10 and 15% fairly flexibly on a running week. That's pretty much mirrored across our 2 attractions. So they're pretty much the same. I honestly don't necessarily know the absolute breakdown of that. I know the majority of our spend is digital at the moment, which I think is probably fairly standard. And the interesting thing is it has such a tangible return. Like, you can literally see the stats. It's amazing. Like that I think we can talk about the good and bad about social media for the rest of our lives. But I think the fact that you can really see the tangible impact and spend what you'll spend and the return on that is really impactful. But saying that, and so it is interesting. We have been trying those kind of larger spend, sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? Activation type things. So we had a Billy Puppet in London Bridge for 2 weeks, and we had a bus go down to Leicester Square for Monopoly life-sized. And yes, it was good for social, but I don't think that had the impact from ticket sales that we were necessarily hoping for or expecting for. But it's good to experiment. I think that's the thing. We'll try anything because that's part of the fun as well. It's more fun to do that than it is to.
Yeah, I'd say ours is a bit smaller, like in terms of probably about 10% in terms of on an ongoing kind of basis. That does change, and I think it fluctuates month by month a lot as well, because it might be that one month if there's a revenue dip or a spike and everything, you can afford to do more interesting, exciting things like some more out-of-home campaigns or whatever it is. A lot of it is PPC, especially, we're coming to the end of our current season and starting the next, and a lot of it is that kind of digital marketing spend. I think if you're a small company, that's also where 60% of your budget should kind of be at a certain extent, because it does show the most tangible results, so you can be quite reactive to those results and kind of chop and change things quite quickly. I do quite a lot of stuff in paid media. Well, I think you should do sort of 20% maybe in kind of like paid media type experimentations, I suppose. So those are kind of paid mailers, kind of outreach in some way attacking different kind of mailing lists. Again, changes month by month. And marketing tools. I think a lot of us forget how many sort of marketing tools probably about 5%. That's where I got to with just 35% here and here sort of thing. But yeah, I couldn't figure it out, but yeah.
I know you had a stint at Swamp Motel as well, who had a very successful online offering, which still was marketed or positioned as immersive. Was there any particular key differences between marketing a purely online offering versus a location-based?
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose one of the key differences was the global reach of it, which means that you can attack global PR, you can do a lot of stuff. It's a plus, it's a pro and a con, because it does mean that you have to contend with time zones and have some poor producer who's sitting there on a time zone doing an online experience, because we had stuff that was sort of run through a kind of producer as well. I think a benefit is, it's leverage, right? I mean, you do the work once, and you don't have to pay the actors more than once to do it, sort of thing, compared to a LBE. I think the cost that people expect to pay for it, though, is very different. Obviously, they'll pay for it, a lot less for it. But you can kind of counter that by doing a larger reach, I suppose. I found it particularly interesting to utilize as a tool. So if you do online immersive experiences and also real world immersive experiences, it's a very useful tool to sell in those things if you're on the agency side, I think, so you can kind of, to market it almost like as here's what we could do, or here's the sort of work that we create, is a useful tool. In terms of marketing the experience itself, I think a lot more kind of social elements and footage of the experience probably was more prevalent in the kind of online experience, because people couldn't go and visit it and you couldn't show behind the scenes photos of the set necessarily. It's very similar, a lot of it, but I would suppose mainly it's the kind of reach cost and social proof.
Tracking and metrics. What sort of data should in-house marketeers be tracking, and why? Or even from your side, Mary, what are the key metrics that you guys are tracking and why? And has there been any sort of particularly interesting or surprising finding off the back of what you've been tracking?
Yeah.
Again, I mean, from our perspective, when we announce, that announcement can drive volumes of ticket sales, and there are clear, certainly in London and even in regions, publications that drive ticket sales. They're just above and beyond, and if you can nail them all on the same day, you're onto a really good thing. And then it's just making sure that you can keep tapping into those publications, because once you know that they're ticket drivers, then you've got to keep going back and feeding them with stories. That's from our side. I mean, I would imagine
from ours,
internally.
I think it's like UTM links, obviously, like tracking links for a lot of the stuff you're doing, sort of thing, and ideally send them to kind of bespoke landing pages a lot of the time, so you can kind of track that. It goes back to having a really solid website, which I think we're in the process of maybe looking at a new website at the moment, just because that's something which we're expanding, that kind of SEO side of things a little bit more. Discount codes to some extent, or kind of codes that you do if you're doing a lot of like promotional stuff, like that's quite good to track, because you can see how many people downloaded it and what worked or whatever, if it's on your ticket system. Obviously ROI and kind of return on ad spend as well is a useful metric for in-house marketers, just to tell their directors and everything, I think. I
think I mean, I agree with all of those. I think there's a particular statistic that is coming out a lot at the moment, and I know that Sheena Patel recently posted about it, is about how the short lead time on bookings for pretty much everything, which as a producer is pretty terrifying.
Did you find that as well then? You have, okay, that's interesting.
We do 50% of our in-week sales in-week on Saw.
Wow.
Still. So it's really close to the bone. But I think there's a lot of pressure to try and change that and make your tickets a longer lead time, which is great. That'd be lovely. But I actually think we probably need to flip that thinking and start embracing that, and say this is what our audience are. And again, it goes back to me saying, that's me. I'm that knobhead who buys a ticket at the last minute because I don't know what I want to do that weekend, or something gets cancelled. And so I think I'm very keen for us to try to start using that fact rather than pushing against it, because I don't think that's changing. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I understand why that can be the temptation to push against it because of how you're scheduling your staff as well. But
absolutely.
Sort of running towards it.
You're on sale for 4 months.
Yeah.
And you've only got sales in the next 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Especially in pre-sales and so. I sent that post to my directors, and both my directors sent to me separately as well. So we were all talking about it just shows that we're all thinking the same thing in terms of like, actually, oh my God, this is totally true. And like, we are seeing this. And I think that probably is a post-pandemic thing more than anything, because I think when I was at Layer Reality, it was during the pandemic, which is a very interesting time to market. There was uncertainty, but there was also this kind of unbelievable, people were like, oh, it's not going to change or whatever. So there was a lot more about COVID policy stuff that meant people would book far into the future when they could see it happening. It was a weird time, but I think definitely post-pandemic, it's and again, I do it too. I'd be it's looking at that's the one time where you go, it's exactly how I act in terms of booking tickets.
Really interesting, and maybe interesting to consider leveraging sites or apps like Dice, which at the moment are really discovery apps for music. But if that is a sort of universal behaviour, then that would be quite an interesting thing to test out.
I mean, so we tried using Todaytix and that kind of thing for both of our attractions. And again, because it's not necessarily the right audience, we just didn't get the traction that we were expecting. So yeah, I don't think we as an industry necessarily have something. We probably do, and I've just not heard of it. Something that services that kind of last minute ticket buying for an escape room, for an immersive experience or immersive gaming.
Actually, that's one of the things we haven't mentioned yet, which I think ties into quite a lot of questions, is affiliate marketing and kind of third-party ticket sales, which I think if you have a small budget as well, potentially, if you can do commission-based kind of ticket sales through a third party, can be quite useful to sort of test, especially if you can put in a break clause or whatever into the contract, which you should always try and do. So, that can be quite helpful to test out, where your audience are buying tickets, because everyone, this is where consumer research comes in of, what are you doing when you buy a ticket? 90% of the people will say, well, I'll see what's out there, I'll look at discounts or where else I can buy tickets, or the Dice app, I'll look on there sort of thing. So yeah,
interesting. Final two questions before we open to the floor. So if we haven't covered it already in our chat, what strategy or approach has created the most impact in marketing immersive work from your experience?
It's a tricky one. Yeah.
That we've worked on individually, or
maybe something you've seen that you thought was particularly interesting.
I think the thing that made the biggest impact two things were when we did the first announcement of the Crystal Maze. And we did a tiny mock-up in a studio with a kind of really shonky Aztec game. And we had Richard O'Brien for the day, and Richard O'Brien left after about 2 hours, didn't he? But we'd secured just by sending out an invitation saying, come and do an Aztec game and meet Rich O'Brien, we're crowdfunding for a Crystal Maze. We secured every single newspaper and radio station and TV, and they all came down, and Richard left after about 2 hours, and I had to call all of the publications to tell him that he was not going to be there, but they all came regardless, and they were utterly taken by this wooden construction, sand, and what was essentially a doorknob. And then we got coverage, national coverage everywhere, and it was really just everything it was more their imaginations that had been engaged, and the thought of it beyond what we were actually delivering in that tiny studio, if that makes sense. And
tapping into the nostalgia.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And we have seen things like that since. There are other things that have engaged press in that way. But the first, I just couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. Swingers did that a little bit as well, just because it was the first time anybody had seen a crazy golf course in a warehouse. And they were just like, oh my God, it's a crazy golf course, and it was with drink. And so it's those first moments of kind of people, they're adults, but they revert back to being children. It was amazing. So they're two of mine. Yes.
Yeah, I think ours are the ones that immediately spring to mind for us is a similar sort of hero moment, but I'd say that the majority of those for us have come from the fact that the IP that we're working with is so well known, and location. So where Monopoly is on Tottenham Court Road, there's a number of sort of TV studios literally just dotted around there. So we had The Apprentice come before we'd even opened, and then that went on the air as it was one of their prizes. It was hideous to watch because they filmed it when it was half built. It was terrifying. So that just completely, again, it's just the money can't buy awareness, which is kind of unhelpful in this context. But I think if there is just any kind of large moment like that you can take advantage of and link to.
I think for an original IP as well, it's testimonials. Testimonial-based stuff where if people don't know what it is, I mean, yeah, it's always helped. We had Neil Patrick Harris come down and do a testimonial, which obviously helped because it was Neil Patrick Harris, but I think even if you have just punters, like people want to see people like me doing the experience because that really helps. So, and that's as simple as kind of filming an audience member or kind of just putting a waiver at the front, which means that you can kind of capture that, getting that reaction. We did a lot of that layer reality, which is capturing the reaction of it just after the show, and that can do that's quite a big sort of leverage moment for a lot of immersive theatre, and you can see a lot of companies doing it, which slightly makes me think it maybe isn't the thing. Anyway, it's it's a good way to kind of get that audience interested from a general perspective, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the more authentic it feels as well. If it's just as soon as they've come out and they're not reading off cue cards, you can tell, right? So yeah. And finally, if you could have done something differently in a previous campaign, what would it have been? Anyone?
I'd say during the pandemic, I did some stuff with Timeout, and not that there was anything bad with that, but it was a really interesting time for Timeout, I think, where that's now translated a lot to their social channels and everything. So the sort of big media channels, particularly during the pandemic, were doing a lot worse than getting results back than some of the smaller kind of cultural publications where people were wanting to support them more. So I wouldn't necessarily have done stuff differently because it's a really interesting test to do, but I suppose kind of relying solely on maybe consumer data. I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt as to the actual response it's going to get, even if your consumers are saying this is where I go to get tickets, doesn't mean they're buying tickets from there or whatever.
I think if I was being totally honest, I probably would have actually suggested that we opened Saw Halloween weekend for obvious reasons. I probably would have suggested not doing that. And I think part of the reason for that is, in retrospect, if anybody's project is fully complete and done on the day that they open, they're lying to you.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, we pushed for that to happen for obvious reasons, and we had a solid enough experience, but we suddenly had 400 people going through a day. And again, anyone who's designed escape rooms before knows how violent your audience are, because when you're testing it, it's delightful because there's people watching. But when there's not people watching, they'll just rip stuff off the wall. So we I think that was just something, and actually
Not a door.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Even though it was a lovely weekend, it was very busy. It was extremely stressful, and I think actually probably what I would say, what the way I would phrase that in a slightly more helpful context, a slightly more general context, is I wouldn't necessarily presume to try to open for a specific season or reason. I think if you're aiming for a seasonal type experience, one side or the other is probably what I would suggest, because then it gives you time to figure it out, bed it in, and make sure that you build that audience more slowly and more effectively.
I think the reason it's a difficult question to answer is you have to make mistakes to do marketing.
Yeah.
So I probably made mistakes this week that I'll find out about next week and learn from. And I think you have to be open to making those mistakes and analysing those and and learning from them. So I think it's hard to point to any one particular thing, because I think you sort of, you have to, right? I mean, that's how you kind of do marketing a little bit at the time, to test things out.
And I think it's unfair for me to say particularly that it's something that I would do differently, but there are certainly things that I have clients that I would have suggested that they do slightly differently, and that predominantly the biggest one is giving themselves more time. And that's not announcing things with really short, and I don't mean like activations once you're open, I mean like that first big announcement, because you can't repeat that really, unless you're going to do seasons, which are pretty cool. But even that big first one is it's king, and don't rush it. Like, as in, I feel like if you just give yourself a couple of weeks, you need more time than that really, in terms of what we're delivering, because then your results are going to be just so much better.
Yeah, or de-risk it as much as possible. There have been instances that I've observed where licenses aren't in place or change of uses don't come through, and you've gone live because the cash flow is important.
If you've secured like amazing press and sets aren't completely finished, they will, it's difficult to be able to get them back.
Yeah.
Or if things, if they're going to take their entire review from that, because
you're assuming the first people that come are the most engaged, or the fandom, or press, and yes, you've only really got one shot.
Do a preview night before the press.
It's like family and friends.
Yeah, family and friends. A week later, once you fix the problems from that.
Exactly. Well, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciated having you all here. So before we open up. If anybody has any questions or feedback or thoughts, or want to share any of their own experiences, please let us know. There is a person right at the back there, yeah?
Hi there, really interesting, thank you. But how have you found the appetite for experiences outside of London and marketing to them?
So we have launched a few. We do Alcatraz have quite a few outside of London. They have Brighton, Liverpool and Birmingham. Manchester. Sorry, I've got some of my team here, and if I forget, they just give me the kind of And the Crystal Maze we did in Manchester as well. We have a few other things that are opening that I can't talk about, but actually, the more we do, the more excited I think the regional stuff is. The more coverage we get, and actually Alcatraz is just flying in all of the cities that they're in, and on like in the press and on social, especially like in London, the whole influencer thing. People want payment, they want, they're quite kind of greedy, but actually regionally they fully embrace it, and there's none of that. They'll just come down and be really engaged, and you get amazing results. So actually I think it's really exciting what could be done regionally. We're really, really into it.
I don't have any experience with it from an experiential perspective. We did a lot of national and international touring, so obviously I have more of an understanding of the theatre scene. But yeah, because we've only just opened these two, but I know that we are discussing about a Manchester site for our next UK project after Paddington, because it is an interesting market. There's a lot of desire certainly from people that have space there to start putting experiential packages together, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I'd say they're hungry. Yeah, in terms of I think there's probably a bitterness a little bit as well in terms of why hasn't it come here sooner in some respects. We've got some expansion plans in the works, and I think it is, just to echo what Mary said, a really quite an exciting time to be looking at those other markets. Yeah.
So I was wondering, you were saying that there is kind of a sort of last minute ticket purchasing. Have you noticed that is London centric, or regionally, Mary, have you noticed are the buying habits slightly different potentially with tickets?
I'm not so involved on the ticketing side, but I think that there is, in terms of the actual owners and teams in the venues will know more about that. But I do know that there was a big difference. There was, when we launched the Crystal Maze, a big difference in purchasing over in London and Manchester. And when people came, they would come at the back end of the week instead of the beginning. Whereas in London, that's pre-pandemic, but I still think it's quite similar. And I think that they've had to modify the way, not just Crystal Maze, there have been other productions as well that have had to modify their tickets. The way they approach selling the tickets regionally to London, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's about a week difference at the moment. So I think it's about kind of, you're looking at sort of 4 to 5 days from someone coming out of London compared to 1 or 2 days from someone in London on average. I'm massively generalising sort of thing. But I think there is that planning for an upcoming weekend or planning for I'm going to be next in. My parents go up to London to get their hair cut, even though they're in Brighton. I don't know. It's weird to me. I put them onto a hairdresser. He's very good. I don't know. Anyway, yes, I know. But they come up, and when they come up to get their hair done, they go to the theatre. So I know that it's something that they plan for because I'm going to be in London anyway. I will do this. Yeah. So there is that kind of thing, and I think that is when you have to look really closely at last-minute ticket sellers as well as kind of discount ticket sellers of what's happening on this day that I can do, etc.
Is theatre traditionally bus lots of people in, and I wondered if there was any sort of future of that in terms of immersive experience, busing people in from the regions in some respects.
Actually, I was looking at a bus partnership the other day for partnering with potentially like another experience and doing some kind of bus thing between them, which I think there's definitely scope for that. I've tried for a few months now to try and get I have a vision of this immersive ticket where people can buy a certain price ticket where you get like 10 shows over a weekend, you go and it's all slightly discounted for each one sort of thing. I don't know if we're quite there yet in terms of sort of people getting involved.
With Jurassic, they work with tour companies a lot. I mean, and they, with their big, those, when you're filling an Excel or an NEC, you will work with those big tour companies to bring in busloads from the surrounding areas and the regions.
I thought we did it with Sherlock as well, where it was the London Bus Company and they did the Sherlock tour of London. They then came, played the game, had an afternoon tea and went on their way.
Yeah, and we work with Visit London, Visit Britain and all of the tourism and the Press Association who drive a lot of the regions down to London, but also you can syndicate pieces nationally about happening in any region. So it will be supported by all of the regions surrounding, all of the areas.
I think we're seeing a lot more tourists coming into I'm going to be travelling to London from wherever, if they go, if I was going to Berlin, I'd probably see what immersive experience is happening over there sort of thing. So I think we are seeing that similar, countries or cities abroad that don't necessarily have that immersive thing, but have heard of this immersive theatre in London. There is that kind of tourist element, which you have to account for, I think, in your shows, in many ways.
Any other questions or yes, just in front of you here, Nicole?
So I'm wondering, this is maybe not so much about marketing itself, more about kind of understanding your audience and if they are getting what you're designing, sort of the experience that you design for them to get. Is playtesting, is that something that you use a lot? Is that something that you rely on? And sort of at what stage would you do it? Like when is the appropriate timing to do it? Sort of how far in advance would you do it? Sort of before your big announcement, before you actually open it to the public? Would you go through a few rounds of that? Do you make adjustments? How do you actually collect feedback? And are there surprises from that? And how do you adjust?
Always surprising, yeah. So we've done it a couple of different ways. So and I don't think either of them have been perfect or correct, to be honest, but if it helps. So we started working at Monopoly before the pandemic, and we did some little game testing in a room and got some feedback, etc. And that's probably what I would prefer to do quite a lot more of. And then with Monopoly again, we were opening during I think it was August 21. So we were sort of between pandemics, between lockdowns, and so I think we brought on a company to help us with it. We did a lot of questionnaire answering. I think what became very apparent, and this is exactly what happened on Saw, is that when we were play testing whilst we were building, we didn't build in enough time to be reactive to the play testing results. And I think that was even after that fact as well. Even after we'd opened, we were open and we were on sale for the next 4 months. I think actually, in retrospect, what I would probably do is make sure there was a 2-week gap after a month's time to go in and make any significant fixes that we realised over that period. Because I think the playtesting thing, and we used a third-party company to do it, but all of the people who were invited were essentially friends and family, really, which probably wasn't the right thing to do. We probably needed a much more general group of playtesters to come in, who wouldn't be scared to break stuff, because, yeah. my sister's not going to pull things off the wall because she knows that we built them. So things like that. Like I think I'm really trying to sort of push for more kind of paper testing to start with. There's only so much you can learn from that until you built the environments. But then I would advocate that you build into your pre-production budget a 2-week break for extra fixes, if you can.
Can I just ask, when you're talking about that 2-week break, is that to make everything more robust or to change fundamental elements of the experience?
I mean,
as
as much as you need to, really. I mean, the thing is, like, you know, we were lucky enough with Saw that we did have some enough left over from the pre-production that we could close for a month in January and actually significantly change the first third of our experience because we were getting a lot of feedback about that. That was a luxury, and not many people can do that. And again, that was part of the fact it's a large budget, IP-driven project. So that's not necessarily always going to be the case. I just think having a period of time to take a breath, go in, bring your creative team back for a few days, put some more wood up on the walls and get some more paint up, I would absolutely advocate, because I think that really would have helped Saw earlier than we were able to do it this time around.
I think it's also about pacing from an open world environment, like storylines and pacing, whether something works and the audience flow through an experience. That's something which probably happens over a longer period of time, I'd say, because you might not necessarily realize it until you get more people coming through and testing that experience, and sort of you start to notice them not going to a particular area, or, you know, going to the, you know, everyone's going to navigate towards a bar if there's a bar in experience anyway. So it's kind of building that, the sort of, I think it's semiotics, or whatever it is, the flow of people.
Just over here, Nicole.
How much of a difference does having a household name IP really make these days?
I'm slightly biased because I've only ever worked with it, so I can't really compare it. I think, look, it has its benefits and its challenges. I think it's fair to say from both perspectives. From a marketing perspective, our biggest challenge by working with IP-driven projects is the agility, with being able to be reactive to stuff when it happens, because pretty much everything has to go through approvals.
There's also a massive expectation with IP-driven things. I mean, like if it's a big IP, people will come expecting it to be amazing, and if you don't deliver that, then you're likely to get criticised, you know. But like I say, I think with the non-IP things, there's always, all of the non-IP things that we've worked with have had either led by the people who are creating them, or by that, if it's not led by the people creating them, it's led by press, sort of saying what it is, what IP it is they would compare it to. So it's like you're kind of, and the people, just for some reason, broad audiences need to be able to identify it with something. But all of the ones that we've done that are non-IP led have been received incredibly well. You know, I do think that audiences, and I mean big audiences, I don't just mean immersive audiences, I mean like lifestyle audiences, are really open to new worlds, I think. I really do.
Yeah, I think I've worked on both, and I think I completely agree with what you both of you said. And for me, the agility thing is really interesting as well, because like creators, IP holders can sometimes get in their own way, particularly from a marketing perspective, where you say, actually, this could do so much better if X, Y, Z. And there's that kind of blocks, you know, you have to do a lot of navigating around blocks rather than kind of, I think there's pros and cons, because I could easily say a million negatives and positives for original IP as well. It's, interesting question.
My question is, have you had an experience working with a major footfall magnet, and whether it affected sales and marketing and the strategy of marketing? I'll explain. I'm now researching for an investor who has a space adjacent to a giant mall, so the traffic will be immense, but the question is whether the footfall, the traffic, the people, the audience will be relevant to the immersive experience we're doing or not, and how to, I don't know, save on marketing or spend other way of marketing? So that's the question.
I'm just going to add something to this one. So Sherlock was actually built in a shopping mall. Passing Trade did nothing really for the ticket sales. However, I think this insight that we sort of mined today about people being more reactive in ticket purchases, which may be a post-pandemic thing, we launched 2019, may be something that's worth exploring in terms of how then to sort of build out a strategy around that. But in the past, certainly, because of the staggered time slot nature of the product, we couldn't really rely on Passing Trade. However, there was a bar attached, which was free flow, and people could use that.
I was just going to I'd say experiential marketing campaigns like old school leafleting and telling people what it is and shouting about it in those high footfall areas sometimes can help with those to drive traffic. Not traditionally, but I think seeing what we've said today and everything, I think I'd probably be more inclined if I was walking past somewhere and someone said today only or something like that. Doing some kind of very cheap, easy brand ambassador type thing out the front or nearby could be helpful to look at. Could be interesting.
Yeah, and quite often those shopping mall locations will be able to help you with marketing and do some marketing for you as part of the deal, because you've got to hope that they know the people who are coming into that building, and then they can sort of help you shape that in the limited experience I've had with shopping malls.
Oh, partnerships as well. I'd say massively partnerships. If you can build, if there's something nearby that you can offer some kind of deal on and they can offer a deal on yours. The example I can think off the top of my head is in Westfield Stratford. I went to the food court the other day because I was shopping, and one of the restaurants had the first half an hour free at the batting cages, the other side of Westfield sort of thing, if you spend £10 on a burger or whatever. It's not perfect, but those kind of things where you can look at what people are doing in that shopping mall or centre or whatever sort of thing, and how can you draw them over here is something to look at.
Yeah, they do tend to have newsletters that they mail out, that if they should theoretically, like I know we've worked with Westfield before, they have newsletters for all the surrounding areas for the residents and businesses. And because what you're doing is a point of difference, it's really exciting. They would probably do that for you, incorporate it in their newsletters. And I would definitely do, a locals drop. Like the leafleting, I think that's a really good way of engaging them, but also offer them something. So I don't mean like money off or anything, but like something clever.
And I was going to say, show people, give an insight of what's happening inside as well. So I always give the example of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride in Disneyland, where you have the restaurant, but while you're having your food, you see the people on the boat passing by. So you create that thing of FOMO. It's like, ooh, okay, they're having fun. So maybe I should try and check it out.
It's not a great restaurant. I've tried it.
It's not.
I fell for it. It's not.
Okay, one more. Anyone? Just up front here.
Okay, my question is quite broad and maybe vague. I'd like to know how different is marketing in your perspective for canonic theatre and marketing for interactive experiences. And in this question there is the question I'm starting a new production company, and I love canonic theatre, and at the same time I love interactive experiences, and I'm wondering if they can go together or not.
Yeah, I'd say definitely, and I think sorry to sort of come in swinging there. I'd say definitely the biggest challenge that when I was working in traditional theatre, and especially with sort of national touring, is that actually so much of what you can do is driven by the venues that you go to, and by that, so it's things like, if you're touring, they'll demand, the local marketing team will demand that you're in their brochure, because the brochures always sell tickets. They always sell tickets. Get in the brochure, give us $4,000, you're going to sell out, and it just never happens. But it's always sort of part of the contract. So I think it's just sort of double checking what's in those contracts with your theatres. And I think essentially, if you're not beholden to anything as part of that agreement, I think the world's your oyster. I don't necessarily think they need to be treated as two separate concepts at all. I just think that the world of theatre is so traditional and set in its ways at the moment that actually a bit of fresh life and people coming up with some new interesting things would be great. It's just double checking what you have to do on behalf of if you've licensed an IP from I've forgotten all their names now, Brosnan, Hammerstein and Co. Then you just need to be just double check what you have to do as a result of that, and from the venues. But I don't necessarily think we should be treating them separately. I think we just do.
I think the larger problem is the companies and the theatre themselves, or the companies themselves, kind of don't necessarily know what immersive theatre is yet a lot of the time, strangely. So I think it's that kind of not necessarily understanding how to market it themselves. So you've got to work harder, I think, on the other side of it. But the audiences are massively similar, I think. So the methodologies, I think, can be, like what we've said, can be applied to a lot of sort of canonic theatre.
And there is a light sort of introduction now with Cabaret and Guys and Dolls, but they are integrating immersive more in the scenic and how they're moving people through and around the spaces and how the spaces change. But it's a first step, isn't it? So
I think the Barbican Gulch Gallery is a really interesting example of immersive installation that kind of, it's not theatre, but it's installation led in a space where people are going to see theatre. So there's some interesting stuff they've done, which I think is quite cool, but historically.
As the last one, I'm from the creative side of things, and I really do enjoy having chats with such experts like yourselves on how the hell I sell what I create. What is a very broad question this, but what's, from the creative side of things, something that excites you when you approach a marketing campaign?
Narrative, I'd say. Sort of having a strong narrative that you can sell. And we didn't really touch on it, but kind of pre and post communication through if you can, when I was at Secret Cinema, a lot of what we did was kind of that pre-narrative and post-narrative campaign. So you would sort of sell the concept, and then as soon as someone bought a ticket, you wouldn't stop telling them about the show until after they'd gone, which made them more likely to tell their friends and kind of have that whole experience, which I think helps with ticket sales. So I would say like the story elements and being able to utilize and play with those story elements is probably quite useful.
Yeah, that's true. And then also sort of even building from them, if that makes sense.
Like
so
expanding the universe.
Using your marketing campaign as part of the story is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is helpful, but to engage consumers via comms, it's visual, everything. Your visuals need to be just. It's the difference between a piece that's that big or that big, and it doesn't have to be photography. It can be something really creative, but and that also doesn't mean you have to have the whole comms machine. It just means you've got a wonderful visual that actually will engage an audience.
I suppose also character-led marketing a lot of the time, depending on what show you're working on. But a lot of what I'll do is kind of get the actors to sign their name like they do in character, and I'll send an email from the mayor of the town or whatever sort of thing. Introduce something that's like a fun in-world thing, but it's still kind of character-led, based on characters that people like. If you're talking specifically about like an immersive theatre show, so I know that Peaky Blinders do Tommy Shelby introducing you to whatever sort of thing. They do some great pre and post comms as part of their kind of ticket stuff. So, but again, it's expanding that world both before and after you've seen the show. And the visuals are absolutely key. Refreshing them as much as possible, getting new ones, getting like intricate details of a set, that it kind of half shows it off. I'm excited by creative, otherwise I wouldn't be doing marketing. I think it is a creative kind of,
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to break. Thank you, everybody, and thanks again, guys. That was really good.